How can Islam claim to liberate all people, and particularly black people, when it allowed slavery to exist? There are two answers to this doubt. The first answer is that slavery was allowed within Islamic law for only one reason, and that is to protect refugees and to incorporate them into Muslim society. There was no other legitimate way for someone to become a slave. You were not allowed to just go ambush someone on the road or in their home and kidnap them and make them your slave. No way. And another thing, this type of slavery was not based on race. It was not based on the color of your skin. The companions who were freed slaves at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ were from every nation, and they had every skin tone. Suhaib was from Rum, which is today in the area around Italy and Greece. Salman al-Farisi was from Persia. Bilal was from Ethiopia. Zayd was an Arab. All of them were slaves. Then how did they become slaves? If a battle was fought between two sides, one side wins and the other side loses. What do you do with the enemy soldiers who were defeated? Do you let them go home so that they can fight you again tomorrow? What do you do with the families and dependents of those enemy soldiers who were killed in battle? Their women, their children, the elderly. Do you leave them alone to fend for themselves? Who will take care of them? Today, we have the United Nations, we have refugee camps, we have resettlement centers, we have one in Utica. These things did not exist 1,400 years ago. And even if they did, the system that we have today is not a perfect system. Ask any one of the many people in our community that have spent time in these refugee centers. Sometimes they are not safe. Sometimes there is no security. Sometimes people get exploited in these refugee camps. Sometimes you spend the best years, even decades, of your life in these camps. 1,400 years ago, Islamic law had a very practical solution. Bring them back to the Muslim territory, place them within homes of the Muslims, treat them with dignity, let them see Islam in practice, and give them a pathway to freedom and an independent life once again. Remember, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ commanded Muslims to feed their slaves the same food that they themselves ate, and commanded them to clothe them in the exact same types of clothes that they themselves wore, and even to share in the labor together. Islam also recommended slaves to be freed as an act of pious worship at every single opportunity. If a Muslim slipped up and broke his fast, or broke his pledge, or committed manslaughter, or many other offenses in Islamic law, his expiation was to free one of his slaves. This is a completely different system from the system of slavery that existed in North America since the year 1609, where unsuspecting African people were brutally kidnapped from their homes and packed onto slave ships in chains, without food, without water, without a place to go to the bathroom, in such brutal conditions that countless people died before they even reached North America. And then when they made it to their final destination, the slave master lived in the big house while his slaves lived in shacks. The slave master wore expensive clothes and the slaves wore rags. The slave master ate the finest foods that could be purchased, and the slaves got crumbs. The slave master lived a life of luxury and ease while the slaves toiled from sunup to sundown. And where Islamic law put a huge emphasis on the freedom of slaves and freeing slaves, North American slavery was designed to keep you and your descendants a slave forever and ever. These two systems are so completely different and so completely opposite that they shouldn't really even be called the same thing. So this was the first answer to our question. The institution of slavery in Islamic law, if we want to call it that, was intended to protect and settle refugees, and it functioned completely opposite to slavery as practiced in North America. The second answer to how we can explain the existence of slavery in Islam can be found in an old saying, "You will know a tree by its fruit." That means if something is good, it will produce good results. And if something is bad, it will produce bad results. When you get to the second and third generation of Muslims, you will notice that freed slaves, or the children of freed slaves, made up most of the leaders of Muslim society, both religious and political leaders. During his reign, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he went on a pilgrimage, either Umrah or Hajj, and when he was on the road, he ran into the governor of Mecca. "Who did you leave in charge?" Umar asked. "Ibn Abza," replied the governor. "Who's that?" said Umar. Umar had never heard of him before. The reply came, "He's a freed slave." Upon hearing this, Umar said, "Ama inni sami'tu nabiyyakum sallallahu alayhi wa sallam yaqul, inna Allah yarfa'u bihada ad-din aqwama wa yad'u bihi akharin." Didn't I hear your prophet say, surely Allah will elevate some nations with this religion, and he will bring others down because of it. There's also a conversation that took place between the Umayyad Caliph Abdul Malik ibn Marwan and the famous scholar Az-Zuhri. Abdul Malik asked Az-Zuhri, "Where are you coming from?" Az-Zuhri said, "I'm coming from Mecca." Abdul Malik asked, "Who's in charge of Mecca right now?" Az-Zuhri told him, Ata ibn Rabah. The king, Abdul Malik, asked him, "Is he an Arab or is he a freed slave?" "A freed slave," said Az-Zuhri. "How is he the leader?" Abdul Malik says. Az-Zuhri replies, "Because he knows the most about the deen and he understands it the best." "Yes, as it should be," Abdul Malik says, and he knows that this is the right thing to say. But you can tell from the way the conversation is going that he's not entirely happy with a freed slave as the leader of Mecca. So he starts asking about the other regions and the other cities under Muslim control. Yemen, who's in charge there? Tawus. Egypt, Yazid ibn Abi Habib. What about Sham? Makrul. What about Al Jazeera? Maymun ibn Mihran. What about Khurasan? Al-Dhahak ibn Mazahim. What about Basra? Al-Hasan al-Basri. Every single time, Abdul Malik is asking, is this person of Arab or a freed slave? And every single time, Az-Zuhri says he's a freed slave. Every single one of those previous people. Until finally, Abdul Malik asks about Kufa. Who's in charge in Kufa? And Az-Zuhri says, it's Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. He's in charge. Is he an Arab? Abdul Malik says, yes, Az-Zuhri says. Finally, Abdul Malik must have been thinking. Then he says something that maybe we've heard before in our own times. Abdul Malik says, these freed slaves are taken over. Soon they will be giving the khutbah from atop the minbar, and us Arabs will be sitting underneath them just listening. Listen to Az-Zuhri's response. Az-Zuhri says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, إنما هو أمر الله ودينه من حفظه ساد ومن ضيعه سقط. O commander of the faithful, this is Allah's decree and this is Allah's deen. Whoever takes care of it is the leader. And whoever loses it or squanders it is going to fall. You will know a tree by its fruit. If the system of slavery in Islam, or we can say that Islam permitted at the time of our Prophet ﷺ and the companions, if it had been oppressive, then this would not have been its result. We would not see freed slaves and their children making up the bulk of religious and political leaders of the Ummah. If it were truly oppressive, we would see something like we see in the United States of America, where the descendants of enslaved people are still carrying the weight of intergenerational trauma. Sa'id ibn Jubayr is proof of this. A black man, a freed slave, and the Imam of the second generation of Muslims.